Welcome back to Between Two Screens. I'm very excited to have Windy here with me for an extra special, out of the ordinary, welcoming an artist onto the show. So Windy, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Ari.
Can you start by just telling us kind of where we are with you right now, geographically?
Yeah, so we're in San Francisco and I'm in my art studio, which is a 5-minute walk from my house in the Mission District neighborhood of the city.
And I know some of our audience knows about your work already, and for some of them, this will be an introduction. So can you just tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so I make large scale sculptures, and what I'm most known for is using rope to tie knots and to do things on a really blown out big scale. So everything from sort of room sized installations, wall sized pieces, etc. I'm really fascinated with knots, but even more than the knots themselves, it's the notion of the line. And any art student knows that the line is one of the elemental building blocks of art, alongside texture and color and some other elements. And for me, the notion of the line and where it starts, where it travels to, and where it ends is the most fascinating. I think I could work on the line for the rest of my life and always be finding new and interesting ways to express the line.
Did you land on this medium after going through a few different sort of different mediums, styles, aesthetics? Maybe even take us through how you became an artist in the first place.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. So I like to say that I'm on my third life. In my 20s and my 30s, I owned a record store here in San Francisco called Aquarius Records. 14 years of just evangelizing all the music that I love to the rest of the world. And then I joined Apple in the early days of iTunes. They really needed music experts to help build the iTunes music store. So I was there for almost a decade, which culminated in, curating music playlists for the store and then becoming the managing editor of the App Store soon after we released iPhone. So again, I was curating other people's creativity and really loving doing that. I'm sort of a natural evangelizer for the art and culture and music that I love in the world. But after many years of doing this, I woke up one day and I realized that I had spent both of my careers supporting other people's work and I had neglected my own creativity. And so that was like a full-on light bulb moment. And after that, I think I gave notice within a month in order to prioritize my own creativity and figure out if I could make a living as a full-time artist. So it's been 5 years. It's been 6 years, I think, since then. And it's working. So I'm happy to say that this is what I'm doing now. And to answer your question about what that creative journey looked like, yeah, in the beginning, I didn't know. I knew that I wanted to make tangible objects, but I didn't know what form it was going to take. So I tried a lot of things, from woodworking to ceramics to weaving, just you name it, I tried it. And the two things that I most fell in love with were woodworking, which I did for a while. I was teaching woodworking and had a little product line going. And then I really got into macrame. So I started with a refresher class in macrame. My mom had taught me when I was a kid in the 70s, but I couldn't remember how to get started. So I took this refresher class, and within 5 minutes, I was like, I love the feeling of repetitive knotting. It just felt productive. It just hit all of the kind of bliss points in my body and mind. So I got really into macrame. After about a year of it, I started noticing that my work looked like everybody else's. Like a lot of macrame out there right now, while beautiful, kind of looks the same. And I had a second light bulb moment. And what I realized was that most macrame is made with only 2 or 3 knots over and over again. It's just a handful of knots. And that's not really enough for me. I recognize knotting as a language, and I wanted to learn how to speak it fluently. So my light bulb moment, and this was in January in 2016, was that I needed to learn 1 new knot every day for the whole year. Like, as in a flash, this whole project kind of laid itself out to me. So that's what I did. I taught myself 1 new knot every day out of the year. And by the end of the year, I was fluent. And I had also, more importantly, built up my unique artistic voice, become fluent in the language, and kind of found my calling.
So on the knot subject, are these knots that are pre-existing that you learned? Are any of them like knots that you created yourself? Is there a windy knot?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So most of them already existed. So my primary resources were dusty old crumpled sailors knotting manuals from the last century. Some of these books are like 80, 90, 100 years old.
Mhm.
There are more than 4,000 documented knots like in the world, and the vast majority of them were invented by sailors.
Makes
No
sense.
joke. So I have so much respect for maritime culture and the ingenuity of sailors who invent these functional objects. But what I noticed was that knots for me are sort of in additional to being super interesting historical functional objects. Each one does one thing and it does it perfectly. But I also see them as being just really beautiful aesthetic objects and sort of feats of design. So that's where I wanted to go, and that was what I felt I had to bring to the world in a way that's never been sort of acknowledged or spoken of or noticed before. So that's my mission.
By volume, do you have a sense of how much rope you use per year by feet or mile?
Probably a few 100,000 feet. And what does that turn out to? Call it 500,000 feet. So that's probably 200,000 yards or something. It's a lot.
How do you think this whole pandemic and shifts in behavior and the conversation will impact artists or the not necessarily the art world, but specifically artists in general over the coming months and even years?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that the role that we have to play as artists and musicians and, filmmakers, people who make culture, part of our role is to take, um, the dry facts or the newspaper articles or all the statistics that we're all obsessed with reading in the New York Times now, all of these like dry numbers and facts and information. And what we do is filter all of that information. We add maybe it's an emotional response or some sort of aesthetic interpretation of what's happening. And in that way, we're performing, that's our role in society, right? Um, Sometimes it can be very hard to express what you and I are feeling now. There's a lot of overwhelm and a lot of stress. And so I think that the work of artists, the job there, not always, but in some cases, the job can be to express the inexpressible. And I don't think that there's ever not going to be a need for that.
And are you creating all the works from the studio that you're in right now?
For my fine art practice, which is mostly hanging sculpture and wall hangings, kind of like the piece that we're looking at behind me right now. Yeah, those are created in my studio. I have a beautiful large studio. It's really beautiful and airy. And for me, the most key thing about my studio is that it has 20-foot high pitched ceilings with open beams that I can hang the work on as I'm making it. So that's important for me. But I will say that some of the most fun adventures I've had have been going on site to create works that are part and parcel of the structure of new construction. I went to Italy, to Milan last year for the design festival. And as the guest of a high-end jewelry company, and I made a beautiful window display for their flagship store, as well as like 40 of their other stores throughout Europe. So getting to travel is, again, one of the best things about my work, getting to bring that love all over the world.
I was going to ask you if there's one particular kind of favorite part or most exciting part of your work, and especially because your perspective is one coming from working previously in a corporate environment, not a lifelong studio artist.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm going to take the easy way out with the answer, which is to say that I love every part of my process now. But the key thing about that is that because I'm my own boss now, I get to decide what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And so if I don't love a part of the process, it's not going to have a place in my daily life anymore. So everything from, meeting a client, doing studio visits, researching the type of knot that I'm going to use for the work. Everything from that to actually obviously making the work is blissful, and then installing it and, you know, going on site to meet the client and seeing it installed in person, like all of that I enjoy, and I've sort of optimized every part of the process so that I do enjoy it all. And I highly recommend that for fellow artists or for anyone who works for themselves. There's no reason that you should be not enjoying a part of your process. If there's a part of it you don't enjoy, then you're not going to want to wake up in the morning and do it.
So when you think about new clients and new projects, is there a sort of dream installation that you've always wanted to do? Could be for a specific client or for a specific space, if you can do anything anywhere?
Well, I'm really interested because a lot of my clients are sort of high-end commercial spaces or private collectors. I'm increasingly wanting to preserve that part of what I do, but also work in the public sphere. So I'm interested in exploring public art. There are many public art programs, of course, around the country and around the world, but San Francisco has a particularly healthy one. So I've always nursed a desire to make a very monumental large work for an airport. And part of the reason I want to do an airport is, like I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, for me, it's about the journey of the line, right? Where the line starts and where it goes and goes through a knot and then where it emerges. So that's a journey, and not to get too metaphorical about it, but we're all on our own journeys, and definitely people at airports are journeying. And so I just think it's a really beautiful and not overwrought metaphor for travel and movement and our journeys through life.
I'm curious if there is a knot that you can teach us how to tie. If any of one at home kind of has some spare rope lying around.
We're going to learn the donut knot. So what you want to have is about 10 feet of rope that's a 1/4 inch thick. If you don't have that, it's okay to use something thinner, and then you probably won't need 10 feet. Maybe you'll only need, 5 feet. I just wouldn't go too thin, because then your donut will be really small and it'll be sort of hard to make. So this is 10 feet of 1/4 inch cotton. So here's how you make the donut knot. So you take the end of your line and you want to hold it in your non-dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so I'm holding it in my left hand. And I'm going to let a sort of apple stem stick up a couple inches. I'm going to hold it like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is wrap the working end, which is all of this stuff. I'm going to wrap it around my hand 3 times, ending with it going up in the back. So here's what that looks like. So 1, 2, 3, ending with it going up in the back. So if I've done this correctly, when I look at the palm of my hand, I see 3 pieces. And when I look at the back of my hand, I see 3 pieces. So that's when I know I've done it correctly. So the next part is I'm going to wrap the working end, which I'm holding with my right hand, around the apple stem like a little scarf. And I'm going to go clockwise. So here's what that looks like. I'm just going to go around the little stem like a little scarf. And then I'm going to take the big rings off of my hands. So here's what that's going to look like. And now I'm going to reach around the back of the donut and I'm going to pull the long working end through it. If you've gotten this far, congratulations, because that was the hardest part. So now all I'm going to do is start making little tight coils on the donut, going all the way around the circumference of the donut. Making little tight coils, going all the way around the donut. I'm going clockwise. And the pro tip is that when you're doing this, in order to keep all of the coils really tight and really small, you always want to pinch the last one that you made with your left hand. So you always kind of hold the last coil that you made, and that'll ensure that all of them stay tight. So we're going to go all the way around making tight coils. Now's another good time for you to ask me another question, Ari, because this is going to take a minute.
Okay, sure. If there's a time where you need to walk away from your work and kind of, let's say you hit a little bit of a creative block, is there anywhere in San Francisco that you like to go specifically?
There's a million amazing things to do. But one thing that I've been doing recently, especially during shelter in place, is jumping into the bay. So I have a girlfriend who, and her wife, they like to jump into San Francisco Bay. One of them wears a wetsuit because it's freezing, and the other one actually doesn't. And we just plunge into the bay right underneath, very close to the Golden Gate Bridge. So you're getting like Angel Island, and you're getting Alcatraz, and you're getting the Golden Gate Bridge, and you're jumping into freezing cold water. Stay in for 10 minutes and then come out again. And it is the best way to start your day. Okay, so you can see that I'm getting almost done with my coiling. When I get close to being done with it, you want to take your fingers and push the coils down against each other, kind of like you're closing a slinky, like you're closing it, and that'll free up like another inch here. And then you just keep going and coiling until you run out of room. So now I've run out of room and I have a beautifully coiled donut. The last thing that I want to do is look at the top of your donut and remember the little scarf that we put around the apple stem. Look at that little scarf again and look at how the apple stem is coming up through the little scarf. You want to take your long end and you want to put it in the same way as the apple stem, like going in the same direction, parallel, right next to it. And so you pull it through and then you're done.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Your next question is gonna be, what is this not used for? And I will remind you, for those of us old enough to remember, that we used to see these at the end of Venetian blinds or window shades, like when you would pull them down. These knots were often used for that. This is a stopper knot, so it's good to use at the end of any kind of line as a pull.
Thank you very much for indulging me in that.
You're welcome.
Windy, we're big fans of your work over at Indiewalls. I personally have been following your work now for quite some time, and we really appreciate that you're letting us into your studio, into your creative process, giving us a little bit about your personal background. Wishing you a lot of continued success and big projects, hopefully in an airport sometime soon. And when the skies open up again and we're all traveling, it'd be great to come for a personal studio visit or have you come visit our studio out in Brooklyn. We could all meet in person.
That's great. I can't wait to work with you, Ari, and this conversation has been a pleasure. I really like your energy.